we would like to now open things up for some question and answers. Again, I would encourage you to use the Q&A or chat function to submit your questions, and we already have a few coming in here. So the first one that I have is directed to Jeremy. And Jeremy, the question is basically, what would you say is the best way to source a demand forecast to fuel the scheduling decisions in the process that you described, especially given the dynamic environment we're in?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's the $1 million question, as we like to say. Unfortunately, there's no magic wand that we can wave and know exactly where these numbers are going to come from. Otherwise, I'd be a rich man, and could you apply that someplace else? And I think Chris touched on it as well. You're having to look for additional data sources. You can't look at the historical piece. I mean, the simplest way that we talk to airlines is they look at the historical and they roughly guess. They go, you know what, we're going to be at 30% of what we were, or 50%, and then they say, hey, we'll do trial and error. And that's kind of that analysis piece. At least you can run scenarios with it. The other things we're seeing is, as Chris kind of hit on, is you're starting to move up that food chain. Shopping data. Hey, what are people actually out there looking at? Hey, I'm looking at the Caribbean. Maybe the Caribbean is, nobody's booking, but they're looking at it. So there is some demand there. And then the other thing that we're seeing is the combination of trying to use that RM data that we're seeing in terms of the trends to say, hey, you know what? These type of flights were booking at a different level a year ago or when we were in a normalcy. And then what we'll do is we'll apply that level of a ratio variance between what we see now in our bookings versus what we used to see in terms of the curves, and maybe apply that ratio to it to apply. Unfortunately, there's not one simple answer to say this is where it is. You have to get creative, and you have to start to look at what data sources you have and then try to apply them the best way. So it's a combination of multiple ways that we've seen airlines kind of attack this problem.
Indeed, and we've heard a lot of that in the pandemic. Lots of creative alternative data sources coming into play, new forecasting models being attempted and tried, and I think it's still an emerging body of work throughout the industry. Thanks for that answer. I'd like to put our next question that's come in here to Chris. And Chris, the question is, can you speak to any recent real world examples of where some of these pillars between the departments and the functions in the commercial area have in fact been broken down to some degree, and where stronger, more integrated work has happened as a result?
Yeah, so I mean, I can speak more anecdotally to some things that have happened in the industry. Like I'm aware of some progress that's been made in terms of not having as much dilution across offers when bringing loyalty and revenue management together at American Airlines, for example. But I also think where this really needs to start going forward, and where kind of the camber thinking would be in this lens, is you can't really get people on the same page and break down their silos if they're measuring things, if they're measuring their success in different ways. So if I think back to the airlines I've worked at, quite often there are things like, the web team is measuring impressions, or the marketing team is looking at how many people open the email, and somebody else is looking at conversion rates, and revenue management is looking at RASK, or maybe they're looking at load factor. There's all of these different metrics. I think we have to start in anchoring back to demand capture and revenue opportunity. And that's what we're speaking to when we call it a Camber Opportunity Index, which takes in all of these valuable pieces of information and looks to calculate what is, across all of the spectrum, the optimal output. And that way, if you can anchor all of the different users and departments to the one source of truth is this, and we are going to be measured and held accountable, responsible to our effectiveness in delivering on this one source of truth, that's the way to really bring those barriers and walls down, and then we can move forward to more process changes and actual system changes.
All right, well, thank you, Chris. We have another. Sorry, was somebody piping in there? Okay, we have a question for Emiliano or Rodrigo. The question relates to as you optimize those business processes for the pandemic and you outsource some of the RM functions and use the Tarmac group, how would you describe the impact on the employees who were still with the team, how they adapted to that new process and those new external team members?
Okay. What happened? We were in a very particular issue. It's not that we were having a great team. There was only one analyst and the manager beneath me in revenue. So what actually happens, and one of the things I want to like engage with what Chris is saying, one of the functions that revenue management has in Viva Air is trying to be the OCC for commercial. We're the guys that actually trying to translate the business into the sales teams and the distribution teams and the marketing teams and the e-commerce team, which obviously here it's everything in silos, and it depends pretty much on us to make the translation of what it means. So what happened is that we weren't doing a great job actually at the time. We weren't training people as they were, and what they saw, it was an opportunity of actually becoming more analysts or more trained or more expert into revenue management team. I would say here, Viva, we're not the strongest RM team. We're mostly called for the commercial issues, not that on our RM perspective. So I really think that for the first time in the last 3-4 years, Viva is now focusing absolutely in the revenue management opportunities, and we weren't doing that before. So he actually took it as a huge opportunity to learn from these two guys that were dedicated to actually teach him and to take the opportunities out of the market.
Thank you, Rodrigo. We have another question from the audience. This one's directed to Jeremy. Jeremy, the question goes like this. How would you characterize the potential use of scheduling data from other past crises, such as SARS or 9/11 or something of that type, rather than attempting a full clean sheet scheduling exercise?
Yeah, good. Making sure it wasn't on mute. Sorry. That's a great question, and I think you can use the data as an example of sort of what happened in the marketplace. However, two things. One, both of those were very kind of, well, 9/11 obviously was global, but it was global where everything shut down. But then the difference was everybody sort of shut down, and then everybody sort of came back. It was not less the sort of staged approach that we're seeing sort of with respect to this pandemic, and also because each country has their own kind of regulations, it's just really affecting things. So you're seeing certain parts of the world emerge faster than others. That's where I think the clean sheet piece comes into play, which actually would be used with the sort of historical piece that you learn from SARS and 9/11. And it just allows you the ability to say, hey, how do I basically reset my network? Because again, if you had 100 aircraft and you're flying and you're now flying 20, bringing 100 aircraft, scheduled down to 20 and optimally, meaning where you're flying and how you're flying, is basically a very, very difficult task. So having the ability to kind of clean sheet and come through different scenarios, I think, is a benefit. So it's not just one versus the other. I think you can learn from the previous pieces, but I think that having that ability to kind of clean sheet and reset your network gives you the flexibility to do something that you may not have ever had the chance to do before because you didn't have the luxury of the time or technology available.
Yeah. Well, thank you for addressing that. And looking at the clock, we have consumed our allotted time, and we are actually just a few minutes over, but I appreciate everybody joining us today, the patience you've shown and the questions you've provided. We look forward to seeing you again on a future Reboot Aviation webinar. Thank you very much, and have a good day, a good evening, a good morning.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.